Howdy ho, friends and foes, and welcome to Dad's on Life, this show on parenting from a male perspective.
You do,
I'm your I'm your host Jay Miles, and with me, as always, my co-host Keith Bogan,
Greetings from Tatooine.
Doug Hemmonite,
Present.
Chad Holloway,
Good morning.
and Dave Duesenberg.
What's going on?
We're going to let Keith introduce this one since he came up with the topic. So, Keith, the floor is yours.
That's 2 weeks in a row. Look at that. I think I have a new job. This is great. So the topic of the day is how do we teach our kids confidence and leadership skills? Just as the first guy in the chair here, I talk about role modeling all the time. It's interesting because I see different people do it different ways, and I could, arrogantly speaking, supposedly teach it all the time because I'm looked at a confident leader in the workplace frequently. But I prefer to use role models out in society and role models in the family quite a bit more than pointing to myself. I don't point to myself at all. As a matter of fact, I just am myself because I know they watch. But I'm very quick to point to other people's behavior and talk about the pluses and minuses of it, of each of those behaviors, especially when they were much younger. Interestingly enough, that's switched for me now because now they point to those things and demonstrate things, not demonstrate, but they'll call out stuff for me that they see as positive or negative in those categories.
Cool.
Right.
I mean, for me, it's like I talk to my kids a lot about, especially about being confident in what you do. I like to be prepared, right? I hate being unprepared. I try to do the little things I can to put myself in the best position possible for whatever it is that I'm working on, right? I got to sign something. There's a couple of key parts to that. If you give your word to something, you have to keep it. That's number one for me. Like I tell my kids all the time, like if everything else gets taken away, make sure that your word is good. That's a big part of being a leader, is that you know that you can be reliant upon and you can be dependable and that your word means something. Um, the other big thing for me is when we talk about confidence, I think of the flip side of that. What's the flip side of confidence is fear, right? So especially my two oldest battle this quite a bit. They when they're fearful of something or they're scared to do something, it's intimidating for them. So being intimidated makes them hesitant on pursuing whatever it is that they got to work on, even if it needs to get done. Um, and fighting through that fear and intimidation is a challenge. The
Mhm.
big one for my kids is failure. They don't want to try something because they're afraid that if they fail, something bad is going to happen, or something bad inside is going to happen. You know, um, and I've always approached failure as not just more of a learning opportunity. There's one way to succeed, there's 50 million ways to fail. So one failure path that's just one way that it's not going to work. Um, that's hard. I've learned that with my kids. My youngest does better with this. My two older ones still struggle with it. They struggle with the being intimidated by failure. Um, and that's a hard lesson, I think, for them to get through. I believe that once they're able to look at failure as less of a I failed as a person and more of a this just didn't work, let's try something else, I think that will put them in a better position to be confident in what they do and allow them to be a better leader.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of things that Dave said, and I think from my perspective, I try to be a role model. I've always tried to be a role model to Frankie and to my other kids, and I think one of it is really talking them up a little bit because sometimes I think that they have skills and abilities that they don't realize that they have, and sometimes they just need to be told that because if I recognize something positive in somebody, I'm going to say it, right?
Mhm.
And I'm gonna try to talk that up and try to implant that and have them internalize that as well. The other thing that I think is good, and to your point, Dave, about um, failing and failure, like from my perspective, failures, it's just part of the equation of life. We're going to have failures. You just get over it, right? I mean, I've had a lot of failures in my life in regard to business, but then those failures all added up to some pretty nice successes. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it's in other areas as too. And I hope I've got the code cracked now with relationships. And I've talked to my son. I'm like, yeah, don't live your life like this. I feel like I've lived a pretty decent life in many respects, except for with relationships. I could have been
Mhm.
a lot better. So we have frank conversations about that and about how, but I don't feel like he's going down my track at all. I feel like he's a completely different, and maybe he learned from watching me, which is watching my failures, which is a good thing, I think.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I think has been really important in both in my life and in his life is participating in different sports or group activities, right? So if he's in a sport, then he learns about winning and about wins and fails, right? So if you lose, that's a failure, and you go, and how do you take that? Do you get all mad and you throw the football down and you stomp off, or do you go, ah, man, that really sucks, but where do we go wrong? And you kind of revise, revisit, and take that, and then but once you can do that, that helps you to get the confidence that you can in fact kind of win, right? And I look at the wins as a way of developing confidence. So I think through some of those, like having your back against the wall and triumphing, that really helps one to build that confidence that I can do it,
Yeah.
and it's just like that old the book about the little train who could, right? I think I can, and then they change. But that, from my perspective, building the confidence of children up just takes that type of thing. Like you can do it, and then they have to do it small, and then eventually they're going to have bigger things in their lives. And I think the other piece is like taking the big steps outside of their comfort zone
Mhm.
and having success in that. If you just stay in your comfort zone, that's one thing, and you can certainly have success doing that. But to go and do something kind of extraordinary, that really helps, I think, to develop the confidence as well.
Yeah. Good point. I mean, for me, like I I like to think that I have a pretty insatiable curiosity. I like well, I hate being bored and I like learning new things.
Mhm.
And I think maintaining that sense of curiosity is what drives my desire to be prepared for things. I want to learn about it. I want to know about it. I want to test it. I want to figure it out so that when the time comes and I'm called to act on it, I can with confidence.
Right.
And it's really a process to kind of get there. And the other thing I try to get across to my kids with this is good leaders, in my opinion, don't take themselves too seriously.
Mhm.
Um, be humble. I'm very humble. I'm self-deprecating. I like to defer successes to other people on the team because you know for me just knowing that you're providing something to boost somebody else on your team up and get them to a better place makes me feel good. It makes them feel freaking fantastic. And
Yeah.
that's a way of showing leadership by instilling confidence, even if you don't have it in yourself, but instilling confidence in the ones that you work with or that you associate with, bringing everybody else up along with you and not just saying, you do all the work and I'm going to take all the credit.
Yep.
You know,
Exactly.
that's a big thing with me, and that's something that I hope I can kind of get across to them too.
Yep. That's one thing we just recently were talking about servant leadership in our house.
Yep.
And I'm trying to get that across to my daughter. Like, you don't have to like mandate what people do. I said, do it by, showing them what you want to do and by kind of leading, but you don't have to be like, you know, the boss lady, right? But you
Right.
can you can lead without being bossy,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
how, helping others is the way to lead. And, as you said, boosting people up. I always like to think about, in the past when I've had employees, like mentoring them, because I don't want to like catch them doing something wrong. I want to find them doing something right and reward them for it, because that helps everybody.
Yeah. I was just thinking, like, more or less, when I read the topic, was that most people, the old line is, you lead by example. And
Yeah.
I guess there's also the idea of quiet like leadership where, you're doing things and you don't even realize that people are picking up on what you do, what you say. And not a challenge or anything, but it was interesting that actually one of the new hires at my job, like I had lunch with him the other day, and he was like, Doug, he's like, I was really thankful for the past couple months, talking to you about your lifestyle and and things that you do. And he's like, I learned a lot from you. And he's a really young kid. He's actually a kid, you know, pretty much in consideration to my age, and it was funny that I was just like, wow, I could not believe that I had such an impact on this person's life. Also outwardly, with leadership was like one of those things once again that being with town council, the day that I signed on to the job, having my family there to see, the mayor actually count the votes and, say that, I was a newly elected town councilor was great. But actually sitting up there now and having three of the scouts in the past year that I trained, well, that I worked with over like 3 years of their when they were younger, it was really cool to see them up there, doing their final Eagle Scout project, which was really cool, you know, and yeah, just keep on doing what you do, and the kids they notice these things, and that's the thing is what kinds of things are our kids picking up before they move on to the next part of their life, which I'm dealing with now with Brendan, getting ready to go to school, and what kind of leader will he be, amongst his peers, which is a pretty cool thing, just seeing hearing stories about his friends, every once in a while, and the ways that he's helped them is really cool. And you're like, was I part of that? When I see that,
That's
you
sweet,
know,
man.
yeah.
Awesome.
I know that things like when the kids were young, we had them in some kind of karate classes. I forget what they were. Jason, I know your girls have done a lot of that stuff,
Just yes.
and that I know that in a subtle way, the kids don't realize it when they're doing it, but it teaches them a lot of confidence.
Right.
It gives them a sense of control. It gives them a sense of, I don't want to say the word power, but just
No, it does.
discipline is the right word. Discipline is the right word, where
Right.
it slows down their thinking and gets them to reason through things, but then they can accelerate the thinking because of how quickly you have to move in martial arts. And
Or
that,
wrestling as well.
say again, Jason?
Wrestling as well.
See,
Yeah,
you have more experience
definitely.
with that.
What's that?
You have more experience with that. I understand the martial arts, but not wrestling. I guess that kind of makes sense too, now that I think about it. Yes.
Hmm.
Well, they're very similar. I mean, when it comes to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and MMA, one of the pieces is wrestling.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's interesting that Chad mentioned sports because there's team sports and there's individualistic sports, which technically there is. It's kind of in wrestling, it's both, but um, it's probably harder on a kid when they lose and win because and different. It's different because it's on them. Usually, it's individualistic, so it's on them. So it's a little bit more difficult with something like that. As for Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, um, Delana was in it so long for a while. She was usually one of the highest ranking people in the classes. Um, so yeah, it's got its difficulties, but
One of the first lessons I ever, I shouldn't say that, but one of the first lessons that comes to mind that tied to things like confidence and leadership, uh, when I think Justin started sports when he was 4 with soccer, which only lasted 1 year, but and then Jeremy jumped in with either basketball or baseball at 5. Uh, one of the rules that we had and their mom and I completely agreed on, they always had to carry their own equipment from day one.
Right.
No matter what they did, and Dave hit on this too. Not they also, when we signed them up for a season, they had to finish the season. It was always with the understanding, look, if this isn't your thing anymore, fine. But you're part of a team, you got to finish the season, and you're showing your teammates that you finish what you start. But also the whole carrying your equipment. And we were surrounded by parents, especially when they were 4, 5, 6 years old, who would carry their kids' equipment all the time. And it's very interesting to watch what happened to those kids later. There were some kids who were really, really good and they carried their own equipment. Now, Justin and Jeremy were never the top athletes by any means, but they grew into confident, young confident leaders, both of them, in a lot of the things that they did. But and then these really good athletes carried their own equipment, and you could see. I can't speak to their leadership because I didn't follow them that way, but the confidence level grew enormously. And little things like carrying your own equipment and showing others that you do what you're supposed to do. You could see didn't just work with my kids, but it worked with the others.
Right.
Kids that got coddled by their parents, they're not bad kids, but they're just there. They're not the ones that lead the pack. They're not the ones that exude the confidence, if you will. They're much quieter. They're part of the landscape and not leading the landscape. So
Yeah.
it's just little things like that from very early ages. I've told the story once before about how their mother and I disagreed actually on this one. The speed at which Justin moved from his crib to his toddler bed. But in a way, and then she got on board fairly quickly after that, but she wasn't very happy with me that I moved him as quickly as I did. But showing your kid you believe in them
Mhm.
by doing that and talking about, he was what, like 2 years old or something like that. I forget whatever he was. Actively talking about, we believe in you. You got this. All that stuff, and teaching them that they can be confident in themselves. Simple stuff like that, which, by
Yeah.
the way, leads into things like toilet training.
Right.
Toilet training is all about confidence.
Yeah.
Yep.
We're still working on Jason, but the rest of us have got that down pat. So it's
No, I think that's good because instilling confidence, it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to give your kids an opportunity to act on it.
right.
I've long said here on this thing that I believe in giving my kids an opportunity to succeed or fail based on their own efforts, regardless of what it is. It could be something small, it could be something big. Um, I'm definitely more of the hands-off type of parent.
Mhm.
I like to teach, I like to guide, I like to advise, I like to provide tools. You
Right.
I prefer to have my kids ask for them instead of just me unilaterally prompting for them. This way it promotes the skill of, hey, sometimes you don't know everything and you have to ask others that are smarter than you on something for help on things, and that's okay. Um, but ultimately I tell my kids, like, I'm not gonna do it for you. I want you to do it. I'll help and advise. I'll give you some tips if you want my input on it, but I'm not going to do it for you. I want them to learn that when you go forth and you do things, sometimes you succeed, sometimes you fall flat on your ass.
Mhm.
Sometimes, and being able to do root cause analysis on that, regardless of the outcome, is important because it teaches you, like Chad was saying with sports. It's funny because you were talking about sports and the process that you talk about with learning through trial and learning through evaluation and
Right.
testing your preparation and seeing where it happens on the field. That's all IT shit. Like that's the same stuff that I do every day at work, right? I research, I plan, I test, I try to put things in motion. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Based on those results, okay, I got to here. Now let's do the next step. I'm actually doing something, a project like that right now that was assigned to somebody else on my team that should have figured this out a year ago and then sat on his ass and sat on his hands on it. And our mutual boss said, "Hey, you need to help him." And I'm like, "Okay." So, and it's funny because now I'm figuring it out for myself and I'm trying to teach this other guy who's technically a manager on a higher level and more pay than I am. But I'm trying to teach him, but I'm taking the same approach. And I'm like, I'm figuring this out. I need you to do some development work. This is what I see. These are some things that you can do to get there, but I need you to give me results. Like, you should know this better. You got to sign this over a year ago. You should know this more than I do. I just got it 2 weeks ago. So it's that being comfortable with, I planning, preparation, process.
Right.
All of that stuff factors into, I think, ultimately success and confidence, and provides a good template to provide to my kids for how to approach things and be a leader. Leaders learn what they're doing, understand the process of what it is that they're doing, and can teach it in a way that doesn't belittle others and instills confidence in them.
Right. You going back to, you mentioned fear. Fear in some cases is an acronym,
Mm-hmm.
because there's, as we're taught in AA, fear is an acronym. There's acronyms for everything. There's fuck everything and run,
Mm-hmm.
and then, which is what you start out as in most cases, and it's face everything and recover after a while. So, not that you get used to failure, but you learn, as you get older, you learn mechanisms to change your route, change your course, change the way you do of something, and keep working at it, and your failures can become successes. Not always, obviously, but that's the way you approach it and the way you try to tackle it makes a big difference in how you accomplish things.
Yeah.
So it's something that I think everyone fears failure,
Mm-hmm.
but it's what you do with that, because you can spin a failure into a success, sometimes quite easily. Sometimes,
But that failure goes not just for the kid, the kid you're trying to teach confidence of and leadership of, but yourself. Because I remember one of my stories, like I said, I was different in how I tried to teach things to Justin and Jeremy than Dina was. The father is going to be a little bit different than the mother, and one isn't necessarily better than the other, it's just different.
Right.
And I would challenge earlier. I would do things like I moved him to the toddler bed earlier than she would have liked.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, and sometimes it doesn't work. We were walking in Palmer Square in Princeton, the three of us. Justin's about 3 years old. I'm holding Justin's hand. She's like, keep an eye on him. Make sure you keep an eye on him. Hold his hand. And it's a very crowded square. Stupid me. I'm like, let me see if he'll walk next to me if I don't hold his hand. And I'm looking right at him. I'm looking right at him. And then she said something, and I did one of these, yes, and he was gone. I mean, I looked back and said one word to her, and then boom, and he disappeared into the crowd. And what seemed like, 20 years, what was really about 15, 20 seconds before we found him. But, you can imagine the panic of losing your 3-year-old in a crowd like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of those situations where she was right, but I challenged too early. And I was definitely wrong. And then how do you react to that once you fail, when you teach something and it backfires on you? Continuing to teach the way you think you should teach to make sure you demonstrate confidence, even in the face of an error, is
Yep.
very challenging. That was a tough time for me, where I doubted myself for a while after that because I knew I'd screwed up.
Consistency in your thought process is an important thing to show, I think, your kids, right? And like for me, I tell them, this is the way I approach it. This is the way, I mean, and I also understand that with my kids, they are different people than me. They think differently than me. They process things differently than me. They live in a completely different reality than I do. So they deal with different elements that impact the choices that they make, right? And I get this across to my kids, like the way I see things is not the way you see things. I will advise you in the way that I see things and see if I can help in some way, shape, or form. But ultimately, this is why I say to my kids, I can't do it for you because I am not you. Like you have different things that you are seeing, different things that you're evaluating, different parts that are kind of factoring into what you're doing that are going to lead you to whatever decision you're going to make that I just don't know because I'm not you. And I think that especially with older kids, like mine are, 16, 18, and 23, um, as they transition, towards the back end of their high school stuff and they get into their college and, you know, young adult years, I think that's become more of a point because now they're trying to get to the point where they want to express their independence. They want to do things their way. Like I've said before on this thing, my daughter, especially my oldest, needs to learn hard. I've tried to advise her so many times on so many different things, and I've learned, and she's said this to me. She's like, Dad, I need to do this myself. And she has a crippling fear of failure.
Mhm.
Um, and it really impacts her on things. But when it's and there's a conflict there, right? So she has this cripple. She needs to fail to learn. She
Right.
doesn't learn easy. She has to learn hard. So there are some lessons that are a little bit tougher for her than they are for other people. But when she gets to the other side, the level of satisfaction that she's had, the victories that she gets out of that are that much more worthwhile.
Yeah. On the other side, I was like thinking that one thing that we actually have had in both boys is them not being able to advocate for themselves and also not doing things because there's like an interaction maybe with another person that, that scares them away. Like, I don't know. My son, like Colin, the other night, we were at Wawa and he didn't grab himself something only because there was like a crowd of people around what he wanted to get. So
Yeah.
decided not to get it only due to the fact that there was other people involved and he just like didn't want to be like, either ask them to move or whatever. Pretty much is what it came down to is that he didn't
Right.
want to have them to move so he could get what he wanted. So he just decided to disappoint himself by, not doing that action. Oh,
Learning learning assertiveness.
Right.
yeah, and that's one of the things that I don't know like what happened or how this happened that both of the boys have, had this issue with being able to advocate for themselves, let's say, or being able to do things that, for us, it's just like, hey, get out of my way. I'm here, But
Right.
uh, yeah, it's very difficult thing to go through, and we gotten help with Brendan, but with Colin, I just was surprised the other night that this happened again, and I'm like, what? Well, behind closed doors with me and the wife, pretty much what I'm saying is that, seeing something happen with Colin now is just like, wow.
That's interesting. Assertiveness is another personality trait. There are some people that have it and some people that don't. There are some people that it comes naturally and some people that it's a hard fought learned skill. One of my coworkers is I've said, and I say it in jest because the guy just doesn't like to he's a yes man. He doesn't like to stand up for himself even when it's to its own detriment. And I'm like, why are you allergic to assertiveness? Like there are times that and standing up for yourself and pushing back, like you don't have to be a dick about it.
Mhm.
It's just understanding where your bounds are, and and there are people that are attracted at, you know, leadership wise, to those that are assertive, those that can make a decision and not be caught in the hell of constant what ifs.
Right.
Because there's, I mean, any given decision can have 50 million different things on it. You have to kind of choose one, you know. I go back to this, to the classic line from Rush that says, even if you've chosen not to decide, you've still made a choice. Like, you have to make a choice and stand by it. Even if it's the wrong choice that you learn eventually through testing, that's fine. But being assertive and moving forward on things is a sign of a good leader. My boss, that I have now, best boss I've ever worked for, is one of those guys. He will make a choice and he will guide on that. And there are times that when the choice is wrong, he's like, yep, that was not the way to go. So let's figure out another way to go. There are times that I've gone to him and I've made a choice and it's been wrong. And he's like, yep, that was the wrong way to go. And I'm like, yep. So I got to find another way to do it. But he doesn't, like, it's not a personal thing. It's a testing and evaluation thing, you know, and not being scared of that. Being able to be assertive, even if you're not necessarily right.
Yeah, and I know I've learned a lot about this in business as well. And one of the things I remember reading was a book about there was a CEO and he had his whole management team there, and he says, let's talk about your biggest problem, the biggest mistake you made at work. And it was silence. Nobody talked. And he goes, okay. He says, since nobody's talking, he goes, let me start. And so he told some big mistake that he made. And then he pulled out $100 bill and he says, $100 bill for whoever goes next, and tried to like demystify the idea of mistakes, right? So that they can talk through them and talk about like ways to overcome them. And some of it, I think, is just like learning that that's just part of the equation, right? Making a mistake is part of being successful.
Right.
Nobody does everything correct to be successful.
Yeah.
There are always mistakes made.
Yeah. I mean, being real with yourself. Like, that's why I talk about being self-deprecating earlier.
Yeah.
Because if you take yourself too seriously, you don't allow yourself the opportunity to make mistakes. I acknowledge that I'm human. I acknowledge that I screw up. There was one big mistake that I made a few years ago at my job that I literally had to go to my boss and said, I did this big F up. Oh, by the way, it affected every single computer in the company. And I don't know, like, I screwed up. And he's like, okay, yeah, you screwed up. You screwed up big. Let's bring in the team and let's see if we can get it fixed. And that's exactly what we did. I came up with a solution to fix it. I had to get like 4 or 5 other people on my team to take some steps and reach out to folks and resolve my screw up. But the reason that I did that is because I saw what happened and I owned it and I was accountable for it and I talked to him about it and I put my faith in him to say, if I'm straight up front with you, you're not going to like demean me. You know, there is a bit of trust involved in that. And then the results that I got out of that was, you know what? Let's just bring people in and let's get this taken care of. That's leadership. To
Yeah.
me, that was probably one of the best examples of leadership I've ever had in a boss that I've worked for. I went to him with a major screw up and he said, okay, what are we going to do to fix it? And he gave me the opportunity to find the solution and then brought in resources to help me to enact that solution on a wider scale. And like, that was freaking amazing.
And I think what you brought up is the most important part. We talk about making the mistakes, but it's not only making the mistake, but then coming up with a solution to that mistake. How are we going to make sure that this is resolved?
Yeah.
And I think that's a super important skill for our children to have is, you know, I'm going to make a mistake, but how do I solve it? How do I move on? How do I get past that and move on?
Yeah. And I've talked openly about that mistake with coworkers that have come on since then. And again, that's the self-deprecation part. Like, yeah, I've screwed things up pretty bad. This is what I did, and this is how we went about doing it, because it demystifies the whole somebody's in charge. Well, they're in charge because they do things better than me, and I'm never going to get to that state. Like, the reason that I know what I know is because I've screwed up. You know, and I want my kids to be comfortable with that.
And I don't think that it's even self-deprecation. That's just like owning it. And for me, that's, you know, that's confidence.
Yeah, it is.
You know, when you could say, "Oh, I messed up, and here's how I solved it," and don't do that, you know, that's just confidence. And here's what I've done. Here's who I am.
it comes back to like what Jason said, like fear and intimidation, being afraid to take that step because you're worried about what's going to happen if you do and it's negative. And that
Yeah.
can be paralyzing,
Yes,
I-
absolutely.
you
And
know?
I can think of like one small example when Frankie was 6. His mom and I were split up, so he was staying with me half time. And so one day I'm like, "Hey, I need you to stay here by yourself, right?" And so we're talking about him staying at home, and I just wanted to kind of prep him for like if I had to run up to the grocery store or something, pick something up, I'm gone 15, 20 minutes, not that I'm gonna leave him there for hours at a time at 6. So he's at the house, and I said, "Okay, buddy." I said, and I went over all the rules. I said, "You don't do this, you don't do this, you do this." I said, "If you have a problem, here's your phone. You just call me and let me know." And I remember like he was like kind of excited about it, and I made a big deal out of it too. And so then the first night I left and I went down the street and I came back. I was gone less than 5 minutes. And I come back upstairs. I'm like, "Hey, how'd it go? Was everything okay?" And he goes, "Yeah, it was great. Nothing happened." But after that, it was real easy for me to go, "Okay, you've done it." Because it's that doing something the first time is always the hardest part, right?
It is.
He had stayed alone, and it wasn't that he had to stay there for a half an hour while I'm doing something going, "Hey, what was that noise? And what's going on here?" So he had that confidence to stay by himself. He had the comfort level staying by himself after that. So I could run short errands, when he was that age to do whatever, but it really helped him because, I just made a big deal of it and celebrated when he's like did it successfully.
Yeah.
You stayed 5 minutes. I didn't say 5 minutes, but I said, "You stayed by yourself, that's it. This is the defining moment for you, buddy."
I'm the corporate pig in this group. Of course, I'm the one who works in the white collar corporate job more than anybody, I suppose. That's not bragging, that's complaining. Um, and one of the challenges in raising my boys was we talk about David. That was a great example, but 9 times out of 10 in the corporate world, you'll get shit on.
Mm.
Oh, even though you brought this mistake to our attention, that means you must suck because you made a mistake, and that's going in your file. We're going to write you up and all that good stuff. Even when you're the one who brings it to people's attention, because corporate people suck.
Mhm.
So overcoming that by teaching that to the boys if they're aiming toward a corporate world, and it's more Justin and Jeremy for me, but they see the example of others who aren't receptive to that, who even when you take responsibility for it, you get shit on. So teaching the lesson in an environment like that is even harder. It really is. I mean, my boys in particular have seen me. I've talked about a lot of wonderful things I've been able to accomplish in companies, and yet I keep changing jobs.
Well, we know you suck.
Well, and I try to explain to them that I suck, and it's just what it is. But to give them that example is harder because they grew up in a world not trusting corporate America, which, quite frankly, nobody should, because corporate America sucks. But they've still seen the lessons of taking ownership, taking responsibility, having the confidence to stand by what they do, even if it's not the right thing. That's a hard sell. It really is when you're surrounded by people who will screw you for being honest about it. That makes it even tougher. I think when you're outside of true white collar corporate America, and even if you're tangential to it, it's a little easier to do it. Not easier, that's not probably the right word, but you have more human people.
Yeah.
People who aren't so quick to throw others under the bus.
Right.
So I don't know why I live in this world. I really don't.
And it's hard
But
because
I think a lot
that,
of
yeah.
too that in corporate world, I think a lot of times in the corporate world too, it depends on who you're reporting to, right? Because I've had horror stories in the corporate world, and working at um, a health insurance company, and then I've had great experiences too. And I had one guy, and I'll tell a little story about him, but I could bring whatever to him. It was very honest and open with him. Um, but he always said one of the stories that he tells is when he was working at another company and the CEO was starting another company, right? So he's in front of the board and he was pressuring him, who was the CFO at the time, to present data that the CFO didn't feel confident about. So he wasn't saying anything in the board meeting, and the CEO was like painting this beautiful picture and had taken liberties with some of the numbers, just had kind of a, his vision was different than my friends. And then one of the board members turns to my friend and they said, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And he goes, "I think all these numbers are very aggressive and it'll be very hard to accomplish this." And so he said he could feel the guy looking at him. He says, and he goes, "I knew I was gone." But he says, "I just stuck by my guns." He says, "That's what my dad has taught me." His dad taught him that for years. And my friend's retired now, but he says, "My dad just said, he says, you got to do what's right." So he did that and he was gone. But you know what? He got another job and he's the one who really was able to counsel me through a lot of different things because I could go to him and again, I could be honest with him. And then if he were, the CEO, he had a lot of CEOs and he goes, "Don't worry." He goes, "I got this." He goes, "I can handle anything." He said, "I used to work for Satan." He goes, "I can handle this." So he was able to kind of, he knew how to react to to the different personality types that are there. And he knew if he could go and say, "Oh, dude, we got a problem going on," or if he says, "Oh, we're trying to handle a situation." I mean, just his manner of approaching whatever it was very good. And I think that's one of his best skills and why he got so far, but we're so good friends. He was my boss 30 years ago. And, it's, it's just different. So from my perspective, the corporate world depends on the boss.
Yes,
Your
yes, of
boss is
course,
going to
of
make or
course.
break you.
Yeah, I'd be interested in Jay's take on that because I know you work with the family business. How does that like? What do you see on your side on that, bud?
What do you mean? What do I see?
Like obviously, we're talking about the corporate world here. Like Chad's, Keith has delved in. Obviously, I've dipped into it on the corporate world, but I know in your position, it's less corporate, more because you work for the family, right?
The family sounds
So you
ominous.
got the
Yeah.
family or his family?
Look, maybe a little of both. I'm not saying.
No, exactly.
Well, no, certainly not the family. Um, I, I I can tell you some stories, but I'm not gonna. Um, no, it's different. Yeah, I don't. I worked in a corporate structure, and I worked in radio for a while. Um, and I mean, if you know anything about the radio industry now, it's not somewhere you want to be. It's not a corporate structure. It sucked. It is the most horrendous thing right now. Has been for a while. Um, most of the radio stations have gone to syndication. It sucks, and it sucks. It's a shitty industry to be in now. Um, but I'll tell you, mm, it has been a tough few years here and there. We've had some tough times, some good times. Um, where we are with family business. Um, but I mean,
Jason, what happens when you make a mistake, though? It's in corporate America, you make a mistake and somebody wants to lambaste you. Um, I imagine when you make a mistake, you hear about it at the dinner table Saturday night when you're hanging out with the family.
yeah, sometimes. Not all the time, but yeah, sometimes. It's just usually handled and you kind of move on. There's been some situations, obviously, where it's a little bit longer term process to handle, but it's handled and you move on. Um, we had one big one, and I'm not going to get into details. Years ago, but it was something that it was a 3 or 4 day process, and since then there hasn't been a problem. Since then, we've had same people come in that are inspectors, and it's taken care of quickly, and they go on about their business, and they found out they find nothing when they walk in usually. Um, so it's you learn as you go and fix it as you go, and it's just the way it is.
Well, back to the corporate world, one thing that Chad will like is confidence also comes in what you perceive yourself and how others perceive that you when they see you. And my corporate world, we're still a shirt and tie company, and there is something about, putting that on every day and going out, to the company and showing people that, you have the confidence and you look the part, and just doing that every day, you know, well, now it's a couple days a week only, but there is a different feeling between, how you feel like working from home versus like actually working in the corporate world and seeing other people, and like I was saying, just putting on that clothes and stuff, and everything right down to like your watch, is like one of those things, and it's like almost like American Psycho thing where your business card, you know, actually projects who you are. And that's a big part of it too, is projecting who you are before you even enter a room and stuff. And one of the things like also that Keith was saying was also like titles and stuff is also another thing that, oh well, and Dave too, and all, just how you feel about yourself and how other people think about you, you know, before you even start to lead either a meeting or something, is that idea of, well, who you're speaking to is like a cool, interesting thing about how like your mindset is like when you're meeting other people. It's just like picking up on their titles and things like that. Like sometimes the leadership comes without you actually ever doing anything.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. And with my kids, one thing I try to teach them is, we talk about the concept of first impression, right? Sometimes you make a good first impression and you're so focused on trying to make that good first impression. You put so much stuff into it, and ultimately you have no control over what the outcome of that impression is, right? Because it's based on what somebody else is thinking and feeling. You have no control or say over that. With me and my job, and what I try to get across to the kids is, you I don't put a lot of weight into that first impression, because I think you make that first impression with every interaction you have with somebody. Because every single time you talk with somebody, regardless of what it is, that impression that you make on somebody else or that they make on you can change in a given moment based on where they're at. So you can reinforce that all the time. And the less you focus on that first impression, the more you become focused on just being a general, um, this is just how I am and who I am. And it allows you to be comfortable, it allows you to be consistent with who and what you are, rather than trying to put so much stuff into, hey, this is me, blah, 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 blah. Like, just, I guess it's a long way of saying be yourself, you know? Um,
Mhm.
and being yourself and being comfortable with who and what that is, are the big keys, I think, to being successful, especially in leadership. I've worked with bosses that are clearly not comfortable with themselves for some reason or another, and exhibit that in some way, shape, or form on their staff. Um, it sucks. Um, but if you're able to be honest with who and what you are, be comfortable in yourself and confident in yourself, that comes across to those that you work with and work for.
I agree 100%. It was when Doug was talking about that, I was thinking, a rose by any other name. So you could call somebody whatever title you want, but they're who they are, right? It's a rose
Yeah.
by any other name. And, you know, titles used to be important to me, but now I don't care.
I mean,
You
the
can
only
just give
thing,
me a name,
yeah,
you just give me just put my name and my phone number on there and my email. I'm good.
the only thing I care about titles now is that a given title comes with a given salary range. Like, really, that's all that matters to me, is like, I can't go up in salary until I get a new title that goes with that expands that range. Like, that's the only reason I care about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the exact opposite in HR. The titles are so skewed and so screwed up, depending on what size of the organization, what industry you're in, and all that. Titles are irrelevant. But I sort of have arrived at a brand. And for me, a title is a branding of who you are and what the kind of work you can provide.
Yeah.
Nothing. This we're off track here because I'm not talking about teaching kids leadership or confidence, but in my industry, if you the way to land another opportunity is to have yourself branded in the community so people know who you are and what you do. And then they think about you before the jobs are even posted. Because if you wait until the job's posted, you're screwed. It's already filled.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it goes back to networking, which I think I've heard rumors I know a thing or two about. So the titles are strictly about branding from my perspective. They don't have any value other than that. They're complete horse hockey after that.
Yeah, it was interesting. We had a speaker come in to the university the other day on Friday, and he was talking about personal branding, and just about all of his presentation was on digital branding. And I'm like, I'm like, I'm an old guy now, so this matters a lot less to me. Just as long as I'm not publishing something a little stupid in public, right? So people can see it. But I said, I think for the students, it probably helps them. But for me, I said that, I was talking to a colleague and I said, for me, I think it's all reputation and network. Like you're talking about, Keith. It's like, people are going to hire me based on my reputation and the uh what somebody else says about me, somebody else's testimony.
No.
So
Yes, but a lot of that is in the digital sphere. So
yeah.
you still have to have knowledge in that. And it doesn't have to be drastically different than in the non-digital sphere, but you still have to have a presence there or you're going to be typecast as old.
Yeah.
That ageism is a thing at a certain point.
Yeah. Yep.
Jason would know about that because he's the oldest guy in the room here right now. So
Whatever you say, Methuselah. We're talking about me potty training. When we start potty training you of using your defense, dumbass.
listen, I gotta poop on you, baby.
Yeah. But I think, you know what? That's a good point because the other thing I kind of touched on it earlier about maintaining a sense of curiosity. I think maintaining that curiosity helps keep a younger mindset. I think it helps keep a sense of excitement in what you do and what you pursue. Um, I I've had my kids tell me that they don't remember. I mean, if my hair weren't freaking gray as hell on the front, that I wouldn't be picked for being my age. I take that as a compliment for my kids. They don't see me as the old guy, as the old parent. I'm curious about music. I'm curious about learning new things, and I get excited about it. And I show my kids that I'm excited about these things, and I talk excited about these things. And
Right.
I think that matters. That's a good thing to show for the kids because you don't want to be so stuck in your ways that you're not willing to embrace something new and get really, really excited about it. Um, the leaders that I've worked with that I admire do that. When somebody's so stuck in their ways on something, it's suffocating. It makes you feel like there's no chance at growing.
Right.
And as a leader, you want to be able to have your team grow, right? That's I believe that. And I think as a parent, we want our kids to be able to grow and expand and do all the things and love what they do. And I think it falls on us as the parents to really set that example. I've known parents that are good at it. I've known parents that are definitely not.
I think that's a pretty good place to leave us for today. Anybody have anything they want to add before we wrap this up?
I don't know, Jason. Let me think about that for a second. Mm.
No,
Yeah.
I think this is a good topic, and I think it's hard to to develop the confidence in somebody. I think, my experience growing up was I was not a confident kid, and it took me a long time to develop that myself. So what I tried to really do with Frankie and with Valentina too is trying to develop that confidence earlier on so that they can have a lot more, fulfilling lives and stuff,
Well,
Yeah.
because I think that just it makes such a big difference in the way people perceive them, the way they perceive themselves.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very worthy topic.
It's
Glad we
funny
talked about
when
it.
you say that because until you said that, I hadn't really put two and two together. I had no confidence in anything I did, even though my parents were really good at helping me build some confidence. I didn't feel self-confident at all until I got to college, and not even my first year, because I was at a community college. But then when I went to Rutgers for my sophomore year, that's when I started to truly spread my wings and be confident. Um, and I think subconsciously all along I was very, very determined not to make sure that Justin and Jeremy didn't repeat that they could feel much better about themselves and develop all those skills much earlier than I did. So yes, thank you for putting it away, because
Yeah.
that's exactly what I've been doing.
Yeah, man.
Okay,
Cool.
so from all of us here at Dad's on Life, take care, everybody, and of course, Keith, eat my shirt.
See you,
How's
everybody.
that?
Later, guys.
See ya.
Yeah.